I don't think there's a team in the country that has a higher ceiling than Texas with the amount of guys that could take over the game and absolutely wreck the opponent's offense. Hello and welcome. It's Always College Football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and today is Monday, June 2nd. We are just 5 or so weeks away from Big 12 Media Days kicking off, so we are starting to steam ahead here pretty quickly. 4th of July is coming up here in no time whatsoever. So here we are in the summertime, and I'm telling you guys, football will be here before we know it. So we hope that you're enjoying all the off-season shows that we put out so far. You can check out the podcast wherever you get the podcast, whether it's on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or if you're here with us via the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, we greatly appreciate it. Today's going to be a fun show. And I would imagine there's probably going to be some pushback with today's show as well, because anytime we do a ranking like this, there's always a notable omission that somebody has a significant problem with, and I can understand that greatly. But today we will do the top 10 defenses in college football this upcoming year. And I think there's a lot of things that go into this. Returning production is massive. Coach continuity is incredibly big. Making sure you adequately fill voids via the portal. Being able to look at guys that were very impactful last year as young players and how much can they grow year over year. Because once you get through that first year and you kind of survive as a freshman, then next time, sometimes in your sophomore year, become an absolute game breaker. So trying to project forward a little bit. And we did some of that today. Now, there are also a bunch of notables on this list as well, where you just kind of look at the culture of the program. You look at the culture defensively of the program and the league that they play in, perhaps. And naturally, you're going to kind of gravitate towards some teams that have had success in the past. We will do that today, but there are a few that I'm anticipating big leaps from. One in particular that I think people might lose their mind about. So just hang in there. We're going to have some fun. Before we get to our honorable mentions from this upcoming season, I want to first go through the top 10 defenses from last year. I think it's appropriate to start there because there is carryover. I do think there's less carryover in 2025 than there was, say, in 2011, but there's still carryover to be had. So just so we know where these teams were a year ago, Alabama was at 10. And by the way, we're not going on yards. I go by points. Because ultimately, as the defense, the most important part is limiting your opponent's points. I know some of these too will factor in when taking into account special teams touchdowns and or offensive touchdowns that points were scored when your offense was on the field, a la a pick six or a fumble to the house. So I understand that as well, but I look at points first and foremost, and that's usually where I start. Alabama was at 10 at 17.38 points per game given up. Minnesota at 9. Penn State at 8. Tennessee at 7. Indiana at 6. Notre Dame and Army were tied at 4th. And then Texas, Ole Miss, and Ohio State were 3, 2, and 1 respectively. So that's where we were last year. So understand that those will factor in some, but in others, a few of those teams that were ranked up pretty high last year might free fall all the way out of the top 10, and in some cases, all the way out of our honorable mentions. So let's kick things off with our honorable mention top defenses heading into the season. We will start our honorable mention category with the Indiana Hoosiers and defensive coordinator Bryant Haynes, who I last year voted as the top assistant in college football. I thought he did an amazing job with that personnel last year. A bunch of new faces, but guys that he had brought with him when they took the job coming over. They had a lot of guys that knew the defense, but had to step things up significantly as far as the level of personnel. Look at James Madison. They were great, but they carried over and became even better in their first year in the Big Ten. I thought everything last year was amazing. They were second in total defense. They allowed just 256 yards a game. They're one of the best in the country against the run. His contract as a result, Bryant Haynes's was extended, and rightfully so. He had a lot of interest from other programs. But if you look at where he was with his relationship with Curt Cignetti, it's understandable why he would want to stick with a guy that he'd had so much success with in the past. They've got great continuity, and I like their defense coming into this year. They have some solid pieces like Mikhail Kamara back, who's one of the best edge defenders in the country. They have really good personnel at the second level. They're leading tacklers back in Aiden Fisher. You have D'Angelo Pons back at corner. So there's a lot to like, but there is enough turnover to keep them out of the top 10 for this preseason projection. I still like them a lot. I think they have a chance to be a top 20. It wouldn't surprise me if they can adequately replace some of the key pieces lost off last year. They could find their way back into the top 10 again this season. At Ole Miss, they were one of the top defensive groups in the entire country last year. They do not make the top 10 this year because of some of the significant turnover. Look, I love Pete Golding as a defensive coordinator. This is his third year there. He's done a great job. His first 2 years, they went from being a remarkably mediocre group, kind of across the board, to becoming one of the best defenses and one of the most disruptive defenses over the last 2 years. They were 14th last year in total defense, second in rush defense. They led the nation in tackles for loss and sacks. So this is an aggressive group that creates a lot of negative plays and puts a lot of problems on the offensive coordinators that they face onto their lap. But the personnel losses are just too significant for me to overlook. You lose Walter Nolan at D tackle, Princely Umanmielen off the edge, Jared Ivey off the edge. JJ Pegues was a great player on the inside. And then you lose your linebacker, Pooh Paul. I just don't think they have enough back this upcoming year to think that it's going to be the exact same as it was. They're still in the honorable mention category because of Suntaran Perkins and because of Xavier Harris, who play linebacker but can also play the edge. Suntaran Perkins can. Xavier Harris, I think, is one of the better defensive tackles in the entire SEC. But across the board, there's just too much to replace on the edges of the defense. Plus, you lose Trey Amos at corner, who was one of their best players all throughout all of last year. And corner was a problem spot outside of Trey Amos last year. So I'm going to have them outside the top 10 right now, but still feel pretty good about the group that they return and the type of identity that Pete Golding has created. Up next is Iowa. And you're going to sit there and think, how can you possibly put together a list that does not include Iowa in the top 10? You're right. I have the same problems. That's why I have them, even with some of the departures and even with some of the turnover that they've had the last couple of years, Iowa still remains in the honorable mention category because of Phil Parker. I think he's as good of a defensive coordinator as there is in the entire country. He's widely considered by many to be the best as far as scheme fit, as far as making sure they're sound and making sure that they're great against the run. They are really disciplined and they are extremely fundamentally solid, which is why they force a lot of turnovers, why they limit a lot of explosive plays, which is why players are always kind of in the right place to make great plays on the ball. Problem is there's a lot of turnover this upcoming year. And I think the focus, the standard's going to be the same. They were 11th last year in scoring defense. I think it's going to try to be the same. I think their offense can help them with that as well because they play great complementary football. But you lose linebacker Jay Higgins. That was one of the best tacklers in the entire Big Ten last year. You lose a defensive tackle up front, Ya Black. You lose Sebastian Castro in the back end. Like, those are really big pieces that must be replaced. So you got to look at some of the production that was lost at linebacker and in the back end. But I do like some of their personnel that's back on the up front along the defensive line. Llewellyn's back, Herkett's back, Graves is back. And you have, I think, a guy that could potentially break out at safety. There's been a lot of buzz about Xavier Wampa at safety. So I think he's got a chance of being quite good. There's going to be some experienced players that also come in via the transfer portal, so they should still be pretty stingy against the run. They still should keep the ball in front of them. They won't create a ton of big plays, or they won't allow a ton of big plays, and they should be able to create some turnovers. But there's just too many question marks at the second and third level for me to, at this point, have them ranked in the top 10. But then again, I'll probably eat crow when it comes to Iowa every year. It's rinse and repeat. They're always so good on the defensive side of the football. Moving next to Nebraska. And this is a group that I'm expecting a pretty significant jump from. Look, new defensive coordinator, John Butler, is taking over for Tony White. Tony White was really good at that 3-3-5 scheme. He now leaves for Florida State. But Butler, who was commanding the secondary last year, he's now been promoted. So there is some continuity that I think is created when you promote from within, especially when things were done pretty well last year. But it sounds like there's going to be a few more different fronts. There's going to be a few more exotics. There's probably going to be some aggressive pressure packages. If you read some tea leaves about what might be coming, they're going to be a disruptive group. I do think the linebackers, that's probably the part of the team that I feel really, really solid about, and mostly because of two significant additions. You bring in Marcus Watson-Trent, who's a transfer addition who led Georgia Southern in tackles last year, had nearly 120 tackles, forced a bunch of fumbles, was an all-conference performer when he was at Georgia Southern. He's got a lot of experience and is a bit of a playmaker there at the second level. And then Deshaun McCullough, who's kind of a chess piece, can do a lot of different things for you. He transfers from Oklahoma, was at Indiana, and was a freshman All-American a couple years ago. He's got length and he's got some twitch. So we'll see exactly what position he settles into. But there are some massive losses that must be accounted for. Jamari Butler, Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmacher, that defensive line turnover is significant. But I am cautiously optimistic with some of the new additions like Watson-Trent, like McCullough, Marshall, Waneri, the freshman who's going to hopefully come in and be really good in the scheme. And you should be pretty excited about what this group might be able to do. I'm expecting a pretty big leap this year for Nebraska in a lot of facets, but I do think on defense they can take a jump as well. And then finally, the last team that I have in my honorable mention category is probably going to create a bit of a stir. I acknowledge this. Doesn't mean that they can't be great. I just don't know how they're going to be able to replace the amount of senior production that was lost off last year's team and at South Carolina. Look, if you look at where they were last year, Clayton White, their defensive coordinator, has done an amazing job. I think he does such a solid job of making sure that his defensive backs are extremely physical, his safeties are really versatile, and he allows those defensive linemen to pin their ears back and get after the opposing quarterback. He's been there for 5 years. He understands exactly where he is. He's constantly in the running for the Broyles Award, and rightfully so. The guy's outstanding. But if you look at this group, they have really been known for forcing a ton of turnovers. In the last 4 years, they've forced 88 turnovers. That's the most in the SEC over that stretch. The problem is we know one superstar. That's Dylan Stewart. Last year, he was a massive breakout star as a true freshman, was extremely disruptive, and at times was completely unblockable by the opposing team. I mean, he gave some of the best tackles in college football all they wanted. The problem is we had Dylan Stewart on one side, but you had Kyle Kennard on the other. Kyle Kennard was one of the best defenders that we've seen in the SEC in quite some time. He has since departed, so more of the attention from the offense will go towards slowing down Dylan Stewart. Can Dylan Stewart still take over the game? Perhaps. But knowing that you had to balance protection last year with two defensive ends that could take over the game, now having to focus on just one might limit his production just a little bit. I am pretty excited about what they've now brought in opposite, and Desmond Umezulu, he's a veteran guy, talented guy. He's going to be there opposite Dylan Stewart. So if Umezulu can somehow replicate the success of Kyle Kennard, this defense won't miss a beat. You also look at another edge from Missouri, transfer Jalen Brown. He had some depth. Jatius Gear is back. He's edge rusher. He's got some experience as well. The main issue for me when evaluating where South Carolina was going to be is on the interior of their defensive line. That's the group that did not get nearly enough credit last year. All we wanted to do was talk about the edges, and rightfully so. Those two guys were incredible. But the interior presence of TJ Sanders, Tonka Hemingway, Boogie Huntley, DeAndre Jules, those guys now departing has left a pretty significant void of experience and disruption there at defensive tackle for South Carolina. Can they adequately replace some of those pieces on the interior? That might be the biggest question. They went out and they got transferred from Georgia Southern, transferred from A&M, a few other guys that had been there before. They get one of the top JUCO transfers in the country in Xavier Hardy. So there's reason to believe that group won't drop off too much. But until I see that group completely play together, that's the big question mark for me. And at the second level, they lost a lot of veteran leadership there as well. Secondary should be really good. I like the secondary quite a bit. That group, if they can somehow continue to play at the level that they played last year, I'm not concerned about it. I love the addition of Brandon Cisse, who's a transfer from NC State, has some versatility, can play corner, can play inside, can play safety, has kind of been bounced around. He's a guy to keep an eye on and a name to remember. So I love the secondary. Things should be quite good there. but the second level, the linebackers, a lot of really big-time playmakers that have since departed that group that was one of the top groups in the country last year. So looking at South Carolina, they fall into the honorable mention category for me right now because of some of the turnover that we're seeing from last year to this year. I said that they were the last one. They're not. There's one more that is currently in the honorable mention camp. And frankly, my initial evaluation of this team was that they would probably be on the outside looking in, even in the honorable mention category. But upon further review, I actually think I have them as the top honorable mention team in this category because I think they actually have a stronger case to remain in the top 10 than I originally thought, and that's Tennessee. I look at Tennessee last year and what was lost, and I originally felt, man, I'm a little concerned about it. Then I look at the injuries that they've sustained a little bit here in the offseason, and it made me even more concerned. But upon further review, I feel quite good about what Tim Banks, their defensive coordinator, brings back. He's been there for a long time, first and foremost. So the group collectively should have a great feel and understanding for how they're in attack opposing offenses. But the big thing is really about the disruption and the turnover that they lost along the front. James Pierce, who is probably their biggest loss from a year ago, he was outstanding. Omar Norman-Lott on the interior at defensive tackle, him being gone is massive. Jalen McCullough, him being a veteran there in the back end at safety is significant. Omari Thomas leaving as well. And then Jermod McCoy getting banged up with a torn ACL early in the spring, not knowing when he's going to be available, how soon he'll be back on the field. That's a big concern going into this upcoming season. But those are the negatives. Once you look at some of the pieces that are back, I started to feel a little better about what Tennessee has. Joshua Josephs is back, one of the best returning pass rushers in the SEC. If he can step into the shoes of James Pierce, they should be quite good. Tyree West, Dominic Bailey, Devin Hobbs, Kalen Herring. They're still a pretty veteran group. You have 3 seniors and 2 juniors that I just listed out right there, and then a handful of younger players that have a chance to maybe jump and leap and take a big role. You also have 2 other redshirt seniors that have a chance to continue to provide more depth and more experience on the interior, like Bryson Eason and Jackson Moy. So I like their group collectively up front, but they don't have the complete game record that they had a year ago that we see on paper every week and thinking, man, we got to stop this James Pierce guy. If we can't stop him, we're going to lose the game. Linebacker, felt pretty good about them. I think T-Lander's going to have a good year. I love Arion Carter. So there's a lot to like there, but it's the secondary, in particular with the injury to Jermod McCoy. That's one of the biggest pieces that we got to figure out. If he can't go right out of the gate, then what does that mean for the group collectively across the board? So it'd be fascinating to watch. But right now, I have Tennessee in a bit of a kind of no man's land where I think they can easily leap up, but we're going to have to answer some questions about availability before we can include them in our top 10 defenses in the country. Starting out in our top 10, the number 10 ranked defense coming into the season, the Clemson Tigers. Now, their defense last year had moments where you watched them and you're like, all right, this group's getting it going. Then you look at the lack of depth that they had at certain positions, and it just held them back just ever so slightly. But I look at how they've addressed that depth and the person that they brought in to run the defense, and I am extremely bullish on what Clemson might be this upcoming season. Let's start with the addition of Tom Allen at defensive coordinator. It was really one of the best hires of the entire offseason. He was at Penn State a year ago. Prior to that, he'd been at Indiana, but he has a really strong reputation. I love the way he disguises his schemes. I love the way he puts players in position to create their own shot in the pass rush, and he's got a couple fun players that he's going to have some fun with, being able to move them around and identify weaknesses along the opposing offensive line. That defense at Penn State last year finished 7th in total defense and 8th in scoring defense. They were excellent in tackles for loss. They were excellent in sacks. So I think if you look at the addition of Tom Allen at defensive coordinator, that was a major coup. And then you look at the All-American contenders. TJ Parker is really where it starts. He was at times single-handedly winning games for the Clemson Tigers. I think of few performances from last year where he just was destroying the opposing offensive line. The right tackle was having a nightmare job trying to protect, and it was because TJ Parker, when he was on the field, they were a completely different defense. The problem is when he came off the field, they became very human in a hurry. Those 19 and a half tackles for loss that he was top 10 in the country in sacks. I think in this scheme, he has a chance to bring home a bunch of national defensive awards if he can reach his potential this upcoming season. I think he's extremely gifted. And if that's your bell cow, you're in great shape defensively. On the other side is Peter Woods. Now, was kind of forced to play defensive end last year because they were so thin at defensive end. But now, because of some of the additions that they've made and some of the advancements that some of their young players have made, I expect him to slide back into more of his natural position on the interior. He's got great speed. He's got great power, and he can be extremely disruptive on the interior to team up with Devontae Capehart, who's really solid defensive line. Got banged up a little bit from time to time last year, but I think him, along with Woods, could be one of the best tandems of defensive tackle in the entire country. You go out and get Will Height, who's a transfer from Purdue, brings big Power 5 experience and some athleticism to that edge position that they desperately needed. They had to go get a guy there. And then at linebacker, Sammy Brown did not play as much as you would think when you look at his numbers. He had 80 tackles, 12 tackles for a loss and 5 sacks. That was mostly coming off the bench. He's got great instincts. He's got great speed. I think he can be a massive problem alongside Wade Woodaz there at the second level. I love that tandem there on the interior. And then if you look at some of the pieces in the back end, they have some lockdown pieces like Avion Terrell at corner. Should be a guy that completely locks down one side of the field. You got Jaden Lucas, who at times was a little banged up, should be back now and should be extremely valuable on the exterior as well. And then Khalil Barnes, who can really play a bunch of different positions, but has really excelled with his eyes as an All-American contender at safety. So I look at this group kind of collectively across the board. I think they're going to be really, really strong. I love their personnel that returns. I love the possible jump that you might get from Sammy Brown in his second full season. I love the addition of Tom Allen and the scheme that he's going to be bringing to Clemson. This should be one of the best groups in the country. And frankly, not having them in the top 5 was tough, but because there isn't as much coordinator continuity, that just remained a tiny question mark for me as they head into this year. But I am bullish on Clemson in so many ways. I love that team this year. I think they are a legitimate national championship contender. Moving on to number 9, it's the Oregon Ducks. Now, if you look at their group from last year, they lost a lot of production. They did, and that's understandable. But if you look at how Dan Lanning has continued to recruit and the amount of players that they play on a week-to-week basis, when they have departures, it doesn't feel as significant as some of the other teams that they would be measured up against because of how often they're playing 25, 26, 28 guys on a week-to-week basis within their rotation. It's not uncommon to see them play 6 different safeties throughout the course of the game. Their defense coordinator, Tosh Lupoy, does a really good job. He's now been there for 4 years, and they have built an identity on aggression. They have built an identity on playing a bunch of guys. And they have a really heavy emphasis on creating a pass rush that puts a lot of pressure on the opposing defense. Now, I look at their edge rushers. It might be their strongest group throughout the entire team, regardless of side of the ball. I mean, they have a lot of great players on the offense, but as far as what they have, if I have to start somewhere, I really love what they have off the edge. Mateo Uiagalelei, he led the Big Ten last year in sacks, had 10.5, probably an All-American candidate. Tatum Tuioti should be really, really good for them as well. He's 4th on the team in tackles, had 5.5 sacks. He should be really solid. And you look at some of the young players that are really highly touted that might be able to step right in and potentially deliver some legit star power here early on. They also add Bear Alexander. And Bear Alexander has kind of had a well-traveled college career. Started his career at Georgia, went to SC. Didn't work out quite as well at SC as one would have hoped. But now I think him, maybe in his last season, they might be able to unleash him and allow him to hopefully reach his potential. Now, they lost a couple of really key pieces along the interior, but I also look at some of the guys that have kind of been poised to step up and some of the freshmen that might be able to give them some good reps early in their career. And I think they have a chance to be rock solid. They go out and they get the top-rated safety in the transfer portal from Purdue. That's Dylan Thieneman. He should be really solid, really smart, very, very disruptive, had over 210 tackles and 6 picks in his last 2 years. So he's going to be really important because this is a complex defensive scheme. Him being able to make sure that some of the young players, some of that young talent in the secondary, making sure they're all on the same page, he will be huge. They have 3 freshmen that have a chance to be legitimate. Kingston Lopa, Aaron Flowers, and Trey McNutt. All those freshmen, 2 of which are redshirt freshmen, probably going to be thrust in there early, and they might have a chance to be one of the top freshman classes in the entire country. So there are some question marks here. If you look at what they have coming back, they actually are 11th in returning production according to the S&P Plus. But I think when you look at everything, the presence of the elite edge rushers, the impact transfer additions, the young defensive line that might be able to take a big step, the secondary talent, and a really deep, well-recruited roster, I'd be surprised if even with some of the new faces, they shouldn't drop off very significantly. I think they'll be one of the top groups in the Big Ten and should be one of the top groups in all of college football by season's end. Moving next to number 8, it's the Michigan Wolverines. And they're one of those teams that you just almost have to trust them because of the type of identity that's been created over the last few years. Now, there are some big losses, no doubt, off last year's team. We'll get to those in a minute. But Wink Martindale's back now, his second season. He's got a ton of NFL experience. And I think now, after a year in college, he probably has a better feel for how teams are going to attack him. He probably has a better overall understanding of where the Big Ten offenses are. And I think his aggressiveness as a play caller will actually be able to go up a little bit because he knows he doesn't have those 2 defensive tackles on the interior that can just create their own shot every single time the ball is snapped. Now, replacing Mason Graham, replacing Kenneth Grant, that'll be almost impossible. All right, Mason Graham was a dominant force. Kenneth Grant was incredibly talented along the interior. That was the best defensive tackle tandem in the country. Then you lose Will Johnson out on the cornerback spot, but Will Johnson was a little banged up from time to time last year, so I don't think it's going to be as difficult to replace his production, but I am cautiously optimistic they'll be able to do it. They bring back a bunch of really solid pieces. All right, I did a good job going in the portal, getting a few pieces. TJ Guy, Derek Moore, those guys are back, should be able to provide a solid tandem there on the edges of the defense. And there's a ton of really talented backups that have been played sparingly, but it's in there. It is absolutely in there. Ernest Hausman's back, who's rock solid, should be an NFL player in a year from now. Deshaun Barnum's back, a transfer addition last year that you're hoping can kind of continue to excel by moving him around, utilizing that speed, utilizing that athleticism, and he, I think, can create some problems blitzing off the ball and finding opportunities. There are some question marks in the secondary. Now, there have been quite a bit of turnover. I already referenced Will Johnson. Rod Moore, though, him returning after being out for some of last year is massive. Jair Hill kind of came on as the season went along last year. And then you have Zeke Berry back at corner as well. So I look at this group kind of across the board, and I think the culture is what allows me to feel quite confident in what Michigan's going to continue to be. They're going to be physical, they're going to be sound along the lines of scrimmage. And while they might not have quite as much star power as they had last year, I still don't think there's going to be much drop off. S&P Plus has them 3rd in returning production off last year, even in spite of some of the losses that they had in 2024. So I look at the continuity with Wink Martindale, some of the pieces that are back at the second level, some of the pieces that played quite a bit in the back end last year, and their edge defenders. And I remain very optimistic about what Michigan will be this upcoming season on the defensive side of the football. Moving next to a team that I don't think enough people are paying attention to with what they return, and that's the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, I think this group has a chance to be the most improved group in the country from where they were a year ago. Part of why I'm so optimistic about Oklahoma, not just on offense, but also on defense, because Coach Brent Venables, he got the job at Oklahoma because of how good he is as a defensive play caller. Well, he's now taking over as the primary play caller. Now, this was a strategic decision to take over the duties, and he has widely been considered one of the best minds in college football for a really long time. He's got 2 national championships as a defensive coordinator at Clemson to show for it. He also obviously had a great stint at Oklahoma as well. Then I think he's going to be just fine. They're going to attack, they're going to be aggressive, and they're going to have a great understanding of what the opponent's offense is going to be doing from week to week. I also love the addition of Wes Goodwin. Now, Wes Goodwin was at Clemson last year as their defensive coordinator. He's now the assistant outside linebackers coach. Him working with Brent Venables, them being able to kind of work together again, should give you the warm fuzzies if you are an Oklahoma fan. So I think that was a big addition. Now, Clemson fans, they weren't necessarily sorry to see Wes Goodwin go. I think he's a really good football coach. And I think him combining with Brent Venables, the way they did when Brent Venables was the defensive coordinator at Clemson, is going to bring out the most of some of their personnel. I love their front along the defensive line. I think their defensive line's off the charts good. That might be their best asset. With Dominic Williams back and Grayson Halton back, they're veterans. They've combined for a ton of sacks. They've combined for a ton of tackles behind the ball. This is going to be a really solid unit. And then you got Jaden Jackson in there, who was a freshman All-American last year. He could take a significant step forward here in his second year. You also have a former five-star in David Stone, who decided briefly to enter the portal before deciding to return overall. Hopefully his production can take a big step this year. And then a couple of really significant additions. Marvin Jones Jr. has been a person that was not talked about an awful lot after he transferred from Georgia to Florida State. Now, last year, tough situation, bad team. He's now expected in his senior year to take a significant step forward in what might be his final opportunity to showcase his ability before he makes the move to the NFL. Him to go along with R. Mason Thomas, who's one of the best pass rushers last year, had 9 sacks and 11.5 tackles for loss. Those are two guys that will be very difficult to contain. The second level is another group that I'm really bullish about. Now, Kip Lewis, he stepped up big last year, had a couple of return touchdowns via interceptions against Auburn and Alabama. He's going to be rock solid. You also have Kobe McKenzie and Samuel Omosigo. Those two guys kind of manning the middle, manning the interior. That should be significant. And don't forget about Kendall Dolby, who was playing so well there early in the season at the Cheetah, that hybrid position. It's kind of a linebacker, kind of a nickel. He got injured there early in the year. Him now being back is a major boost to that group from top to bottom. So really excited about what that group might look like. And then in the back end, they have a couple of really talented corners, but still kind of figuring out who exactly is going to fit where. They really need to replace Danny Stutzman's production. That will be almost impossible to do. He was the team's leader. He was the vocal leader. He was the heart and soul of that team for the last couple of years. But I do think their personnel will be able to adequately replace Danny Stutzman's production. It won't be easy, but I think they have to have 2 or 3 guys that fill Danny Stutzman's role. I think they have that depth at the second level. So if you look at their S&P plus returning production, it's just 13th, which obviously is a long way from 7th, where we have them ranked. But I love the addition of Brent Venables, as I know it's not an addition, but I love him taking over full time. I love the addition of Wes Goodman. I love the additions that they made in the portal, like Marvin Jones. And I love the personnel that returned that can potentially take over the game on a week-to-week basis. So I think this should be a physical, disruptive group that will be a real problem for every single opponent they face here in 2025. At number 6, it's the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, Kalen DeBoer decided to hire Kane Womack a year ago, and it took a little bit of time. Now, there was obviously a significant transition from Nick Saban to Kalen DeBoer in many ways, but their philosophy defensively changed quite a bit. And if you think about what Kane Womack had been for a very long time, yes, they want to run man, but yes, they also want to utilize a lot of vision principles, which is a fancy way of saying zone principles. And that took a little time. And as a result, there in the first month and a half of the season, there were some growing pains for Kane Womack and his personnel. But I love the way the team started to round into shape as the season went along. Remember, they were extremely young on defense last year as well. They at times had as many as 4 freshmen on the field at any one given time. Those guys are all back. Those guys are all now sophomores. And those guys are all in a position to, I think, take a significant step here. They have a lot of returning talent. They have a bunch of contributors off last year's teams that decided to come back and should be able to anchor. Up front, it really starts with LT Overton and Tim Keenan. Now, LT Overton, him deciding to return was massive. Now, Keenan's going to be that big body in the middle of the defense. He'll be able to go alongside James Smith. Those two guys kind of in the interior are massive, but the big question for Alabama's defense is, where is the pass rush going to come from? Well, LT Overton can help deliver that, but Quay Russaw, he's the guy that I think has a chance to take over the game. Look, he was a little bit banged up at times last year, got a little banged up in the Wisconsin game, but there were so many moments throughout the year in which you saw those flashes. Now, if he can put it all together in his redshirt sophomore year, he's got all SEC and all American potential for sure. You also have Kelby Collins, who transfers over from Florida, got a bunch of reps kind of on the interior, but he could be one of the top backups at a bunch of different spots and has some position versatility. Then you have a couple highly touted prospects that Alabama is very bullish on. Keon Keeley was a highly recruited prospect. He's now in his redshirt sophomore year. It might be the time for him to really take a leap and become a legitimate playmaker there on the edge of the defense. Really, the second level is where I think most people are really optimistic about what this group might look like. Deontay Lawson's back. It's his 5th year. He could have gone to the NFL. He opted to come back, did miss spring, but this is a guy that was playing high-level football throughout all of last year. Did have some moments, a la the Vanderbilt game, in which him and Jahad Campbell, his running mate, they were maybe a little bit out of position from time to time. I think that was just becoming more and more comfortable with the scheme change from where they ran previously to what they ran last year. Justin Jefferson's got a ton of juice and a ton of athleticism. Then you also have a few guys in the back end that I am really optimistic about. I thought Damani Jackson and Xavier Brown, they're one of the best cornerback tandems in the country. And then Keon Sabb at safety, he was outstanding in the time that he was out there. He played most of the year with a hurt foot, so we never really got to see him at his very best. But now coming back, being fully healthy to pair with Bray Hubbard, that could be one of the best safety tandems in the entire country as well. They also have a bunch of other guys like Cameron Calhoun, Zay Mincy, a bunch of guys that are hoping to be back to provide adequate depth at several positions on the defense. They are S&P Plus's 5th in returning production, so this should be a group that takes a significant step forward. Just think just how much more comfortable this Alabama group will be from top to bottom under Kane Womack for the second year. Ton of elite talent, a ton of guys that played last year that got their feet wet. Now they're poised to take a huge leap. This could be one of the best groups in the country by season's end, assuming those young players can continue to develop the way they were developing throughout last season. Now getting into our top 5, and this is where it gets very tough, because I got to be honest with you, really any of the teams ranked between 6-1, 7-1, 8-1, any of these teams has a real legitimate argument to be number 1. They really do. You could even go as far as like Clemson sitting there at 10. I can make a strong argument on behalf of Clemson that they could be one of the best defenses, if not the best defense in the country next year. So really, if you look at all these teams, it's so hard to put pieces where, but you have to go a little bit on continuity. You have to go a little bit on upside. You have to go a little bit on young players taking the step. Like there's a lot of question marks surrounding this, but the top 5 is as follows. We'll start at number 5. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Their defense last year, I think, was so much fun to watch. I absolutely loved covering this team. I love the identity that Marcus Freeman has employed. I think he's a defensive guru. I love that you know what they're going to run. They're going to get up in your face. They're going to challenge you. They're going to go press man, and they're going to be pretty aggressive with some of their blitz schemes. Like, you know what you're getting. Just now you got to man up and go beat them, and it's hard to do. The one thing that held me back from putting Notre Dame in number 1, number 2, or number 3 is the turnover at defensive coordinator. And I have a ton of respect. I'm talking a ton of respect for Chris Ash. But it just goes to show you how much respect I had for Al Golden, who has since now left to become a defensive coordinator in the NFL. But Ash has a really solid background as well. He'd been at Ohio State under Urban Meyer, helped lead them to a national championship. He's also spent time as the DC at Wisconsin, Arkansas, Texas. He's been around for a while, okay? And he is going to be able to step right into what was a remarkably successful foundation that was established by Marcus Freeman and Al Golden. And it will not be a massive, complete upending of what it is they do. Like, they got a lot of players back, and they should be very, very good. The big question is, how do you replace the defensive tackles Howard Cross and Riley Mills? Now, those two guys being gone, yeah, it's significant. There's no denying that. But they played the final month of the regular season without Howard Cross. They played the last 2 or 3 games of the college football playoff without Riley Mills. So you've already gotten a little bit of a glimpse as to what it might look like if those guys are unavailable. And guess what? The results were pretty dang good. Let's start up front. I really like what they have back on the edges defensively. Last year, they were a disruptive group on the edge, but that was without two of their best players who they lost early in the season. They lost Boubacar Traore. They lost Jordan Botelho. These two guys now being healthy, they got hurt early in the year. Them being healthy is significant, but because they got hurt, it allowed opportunities for guys like Josh Burnham, for a guy like Bryce Young to step in and get quite a bit of reps last year throughout the regular season and the postseason run. So those guys aren't young guys. They played a lot, but now they're going to be reinforced with the preseason starters to add more depth to the edges of their defense. That is a great place to start. You look also on the interior defensive line. Gabriel Rubio, who might be that big piece to replace Riley Mills, he got to play an awful lot. Jason Onye got to play an awful lot. Donovan Heinisch had some great moments last year, albeit somewhat undersized, but can be that disruptive piece, maybe not as disruptive as Howard Cross, but can be that undersized, twitchy defensive tackle that can create some problems for the opposing defense. And you got a lot of young players in this past recruiting class that might be able to step right in and give you some good reps there early in their career as well. Because if there's one thing that we've learned about Notre Dame, when they play freshmen on defense, sometimes in some weird, crazy cases, the freshmen are just as good as the veterans that are and the All-Americans that they just replaced. I don't know how they do it, but I'm sure it's the way they recruit and the way they accelerate the development for those young guys as well. I think they're loaded at linebacker. Drake Bowen, he had a great run last year throughout the season. Replacing Jack Kaiser will be difficult, but I think he is absolutely capable to go along with Jalen Sneed, Jaden Osbury, and Kingston Viliamu-Asa. Those three are going to kind of battle. There's really two, maybe three spots. You have four. That's a great place to be. Now, Viliamu-Asa, he showed a lot of promise last year, and he's heading into his sophomore year. Do not be surprised whatsoever if he has a significant leap forward this year. He's got a ton of talent. If he can stay healthy, look out. That could be a real problem group. That linebacker group in general, the versatility, the depth, you got to love what they have back there at the second level. And then the real strength of the defense might actually come in the secondary. As crazy as that may sound. You lose two All-Americans off last year's team in Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts. Yes, I am concerned about the vacant hole that is Xavier Watts. That's significant. But we have Leonard Moore back at corner. He was the freshman defensive player of the year last year and got to start the last 7, 8, 9 games and played incredibly well down the stretch as a true freshman. Just imagine how good he's going to be here in the sophomore year. On the other side will be Christian Gray. Should be one of the best cornerback duos in the country. I love the addition of Devontae Smith from Alabama. Was banged up throughout most of last year, but the guy's tough as nails. He's a heat-seeking missile and will be versatile, can play nickel or can play safety, but wherever they put him, you're going to know where he's at because he will hit you and he will make you feel it. That's for sure. Adon Schuler's back at one of the safety spots. He'll lock down that spot, and we'll see exactly how it's all going to work out with the competition at the other spot. But you also have some other true freshmen that might find their way onto the field very early as well. I love this group, and part of the reason why I love this group is because when they've lost pieces in the past, a la last year, by losing multiple defensive ends, by losing their best corner, by having a couple guys that were in and out of the lineup at linebacker, they didn't drop off at all. They didn't skip a beat. There's been a culture created by Marcus Freeman where it's a next man up mentality, and it doesn't matter how good the guy is that you're replacing, you're going to be just as good. And more often than not, they have been. I love where they're heading. They're a top 5 group right now, but it wouldn't shock me at all if when we fast forward to season's end, this is actually a more athletic version of Notre Dame's defense from a year ago. At number 4, I'm going with the Georgia Bulldogs. And this might be a little controversial because they were not quite the same last year as they were in years past. There were moments for Georgia's defense last year where you're like, goodness gracious alive. I think about that first Texas game and just how crazy it was and how dominant they were and how aggressive they were. But then there were also moments like the first half against Alabama where it's like, what the heck just happened? So this was a group that was a little bit up and down last year, but I do think their low points, that floor should be quite a bit higher last year, partly because I just trust Kirby Smart. I think he's one of the best defensive minds in the entire country. I think he creates a culture of physicality and toughness that a lot of people don't want to play against, and it's hard to play against this group collectively. Glenn Schumann's back as the defensive coordinator, has been there forever. Tavares Robinson's back as the co-defensive coordinator. They're going to be really, really solid. And yes, they lost some amazing players off last year's team. Losing Mykel Williams, losing Jalen Walker, those guys were off the charts good. There were a bunch of others that they lost as well. But when have you ever been super concerned about some of the departures that we saw off Georgia's defense? I'm not one that spends a lot of time worrying about the personnel that Georgia had. They had a lot of guys that were in and out of the lineup and a lot of guys that were banged up last year, and yet they still played pretty good football throughout most of the year. Christian Miller's back. He's got a chance, I think, to be a breakout candidate there on the interior of the defensive line. I don't know if he's quite Jalen Carter or Jordan Davis, but he could be the next man up as far as a dominant presence there. He started only 10 games and was banged up throughout most of the year, but there was a lot of potential that was flashed at times last year. You also have Jordan Hall, who had a big spring, and it sounds like for being quite a bit banged up last year, he's now fully healthy and has a chance to be a massive difference maker. And then Xavier McLeod, another promising guy on the interior whose role should be increased. They have a true freshman in Elijah Griffin, and we've seen true freshmen in the past play at linebacker. We've seen true freshmen in the past play off the edge. They're going to find a place for some of their most talented young guys, and they might be in a really good spot to be able to do that. I love their linebacker core across the board. Raylan Wilson, CJ Allen, those guys have now been playing together for the last 2 years. They're both entering their true junior year. That 1-2 punch is outstanding to go along with Chris Cole, who as a freshman last year did some really impressive things. Remember the name Justin Williams as well. These are highly anticipated pieces that were young last year, played a little, but now that they get maybe a little bit more work, they can become even more impressive as they continue to develop. And then in the secondary, love the additions that they've made in some spots, but Dalen Everett's back, KJ Bolden's back, who had an outstanding true freshman year last year and might be one of the best safeties in the country by season's end. And then Janelle Aguero, who's a solid piece there on the edge, kind of a nickel star type of player. His absence at times was felt early in the year, but he's now back and should be in a really good spot to go along with Daniel Harris, Ellis Robinson. They just have so much depth in the back end defensively. So I love the depth of this group. Kirby Smart's always talking about, well, I don't have the depth I once did. Well, no one does. Because when you take into account what his team had in 21 and 22, nobody had that kind of depth. Nobody ever again will have that kind of depth, but they'll be the closest ones to it. And I love some of their personnel coming into this year. It always is tough to replace some of the difference makers, but it's always easy to feel pretty good given the 4- and 5-star recruits that are stepping right in those voids. Moving next to number 3, and it's Penn State. Should be one of the best defenses in the country again this year, and I love the addition of Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator. I loved Tom Allen last year. I thought it'd be almost impossible to adequately replace Tom Allen after he departed for Clemson, but knowing that Jim Knowles steps in, feel pretty confident about this group being aggressive, being sound, being solid, being stout against the run, and really evaluating and developing talent throughout the course of the season. They lost some really great players. Kobe King at linebacker was amazing. And everybody knows how impossible it's likely going to be to replace Abdul Carter off the edge. But the return of Denai Dennis-Sutton and Zane Durant should allow for me to be a little bit less concerned. Now, Denai Dennis-Sutton's a different player. He's a different player than Abdul Carter. He's not going to have 20 sacks. That's not who he is. But he's going to be really stout on the end of the line of scrimmage against the run, and he will give you some pass rush from time to time. Smith Vilbert back for a 7th year is also big as well as far as the depth that they'll have. And they brought in some solid transfer additions there along the defensive line that should help bolster the unit as well. Losing Kobe King at the second level, like I said, very tough to replace his production. But Dom DeLuca and Tony Rojas, those guys have played a lot of football. And then the addition of Mari Campbell from North Carolina, he's got quite a bit of experience as well. And then in the back end, I really like their secondary. A.J. Harris might be one of the top corners in the country. Zaki Wheatley showed a lot of promise and growth last year at safety. The return of King Mack, who transfers back from Alabama, he should be important for them as they continue to develop. But I love this coordinator. I love their personnel. I love some of the veteran leadership that they have at all 3 levels defensively. I think this could be one of the best groups that Penn State's had on defense in quite some time. They're 6th in S&P Plus returning production, but they'll be able to generate pressure. They'll be able to lock down teams along the line of scrimmage. They'll be stout as can be against the run, and they should be really, really good from a cover standpoint, knowing some of the pieces that are back there in the secondary for the Nittany Lions. Moving next to the number 2 defense in the country coming into this upcoming season, and it's hard for me to think about this group as number one or number two defense, given some of the personnel that was lost off last year. But I look at the culture that's been created, and it's hard for me not to look at Ohio State and have them in the top two this year. Look, there's been a lot of changes. You lose your coordinator, Jim Knowles. He's now at Penn State, but you bring in Matt Patricia to replace Jim Knowles. I mean, longtime NFL assistant, former head coach, defense coordinator coming in, bringing that NFL experience, bringing that understanding of how to play complementary because he's served as a head coach in the past. As a really smart, fundamentally sound coach that is going to get the most out of some of his returning talent. And he might have the most talented player pound for pound in the country that returns to his secondary. That's Caleb Downs. I think he's the most versatile. I think he's the best defensive player. I think he can cover the entire field. I think he can be impactful in the run game. If you want to play him at linebacker level, he could do that. I think the guy could literally play almost all 11 snaps, all 11 positions on defense. Like, I really believe he's just that rare from a talent standpoint, but he's not the only one. Sonny Styles is back, linebacker, kind of hybrid outside linebacker type, really came on well as the season went forward. The more he was able to kind of get near the line of scrimmage and sniff things out, his versatility is huge. He can also be used as a blitzer in possible blitz situations, edge rusher in certain situations. I love where he's at. And I love, too, that Jermaine Matthews is back as well as one of the lockdown corners. I think he's a shutdown corner. His peer, Davison Igbinosun, who I think is extremely physical, oftentimes maybe a little too physical, does occasionally get flagged, but that's a really good 1-2 punch at corner to rely upon as long as Davison Igbinosun can clean up his fundamentals just a little bit and avoid grabbing the jersey like he did so many times last year. Along the defensive line, there is a lot of turnover. There's a lot. And that's, I think, part of the reason why they're not number one. But I look at the addition of a Bo Atkinson from North Carolina. He should be an immediate impact player. I look at Edric Houston. I look at Caden McDonald. Those guys are poised for a bigger role at defensive tackle. And I know, just knowing that second level, there's just so many good pieces with athleticism. They're going to be just fine. I think Patricia will kind of mix the front. Wouldn't be surprised to see a few more 3-down defensive line looks, maybe a few less 4-3 defensive line looks. But I could see them kind of mixing things up and creating significant problems for the opposing offense. Look, there are a lot of turnover. There's a lot of change. There is a bunch of new faces, but the way they've recruited, the way they developed, I'm just not concerned about having to replace those pieces. They're going to be one of the top groups in the country yet again this year. And then finally, the number one defense in college football coming into the season are the Texas Longhorns. If you look at what they have, it's honestly off the charts from a star power standpoint. Now, they've lost some key pieces the last couple of years, notably at defensive tackle. I mean, the last couple of years, they've lost a lot of really good players on the interior of their defensive line. But if you look at the star power that they return at so many different positions, I don't think there's a team in the country that has a higher ceiling than Texas with the amount of guys that could take over the game and absolutely wreck the opponent's offense. We will start with the guys that can play multiple positions. We'll start with Anthony Hill. The guy's a complete superstar. I think he's the best linebacker in the country, ridiculously athletic, amazing against the run and the pass. He's versatile enough to, in a third down situation, he can get to the line of scrimmage. He can cover. This guy can do absolutely anything on the football field. He should be one of the best players in America this upcoming season. The return of Trey Moore was massive. There was a time where you thought he would be going to the NFL. He was great at UTSA a few years ago, had 14 sacks in 2023. In his first year at Texas, it was pretty good. It wasn't elite until the season kind of went along. And then as he was kind of playing a little bit more off the ball, a few more things as far as pass rush situations, his impact became more significant as the game went along. He's got a lot of position flexibility. He's got a lot of versatility on that side of the ball, so he can do a lot of different things and create a lot of problems. And then finally, Colin Simmons. Certainly last but not least, this guy is ridiculous. I'm not sure there is a more feared pass rusher in the SEC outside of maybe Dylan Stewart, but he's expected to take on an even bigger role here in 2025. If he can go alongside Trey Moore and Anthony Hill's in the middle, you got Colin Simmons on one side, Trey Moore on the other, and Anthony Hill in the middle, I don't know what you do. I really don't know how you're going to be able to adequately defend all three of those guys. One of those guys is going to get home on a down in, down out basis in obvious passing situations. You bring in a couple of key pieces as well. Via the transfer portal, Travis Shaw from North Carolina, Cole Brevard from Purdue. Those are key additions to kind of reinforce some of the depth on the interior. And then don't forget some of the pieces that are left over that maybe get a little bit overshadowed, like Ethan Burke. He on the edge is a guy that you do not want to sleep on as well. He might not quite as much twitch as Colin Simmons or Trey Moore, but his presence is always one that needs to be accounted for. In the secondary, they have 5 players back that are really, really solid kind of across the board. Michael Taff is back at safety. Malik Muhammad at corner, who's been around for quite some time. Jelani McDonald there at nickel and kind of played the star. Derek Williams, who is one of their best cover guys in the secondary. Him staying healthy is going to be massive. Jalen Gilbo at cornerback. Like, they are really solid across the board. And they went out and got some of the top young players in the country to come in and reinforce their depth there in the back end. Pete Kwiatkowski has been there now 5 years. Has provided great stability, but they have continued to be as sound against the run as one can imagine. And then with the upside they have and the personnel they have with Hill, Moore, Simmons, and others, this group has a ridiculously high ceiling this upcoming season. I don't think there's a group in the country that can get after the quarterback better. That's what makes the Texas Longhorns the #1 defense in the country heading into the 25 season. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. But before we let you go, I want to tell you about the latest installment of the Places series with Premier League Lacrosse co-founder and National Lacrosse Hall of Famer Paul Rabil. It's a 5-episode series premiering on June 4th, running for 5 weeks, and explores the sport's origins, iconic figures, and its rise to prominence. Check it out on ESPN+. Really appreciate all of you for being here with us throughout the offseason. We have so much that we have to look forward to. We're just 5 weeks away from getting things started at Big 12 Media Days. The SEC Media Days will follow that. A ton of things that we'll be focusing on. I'm going to be in attendance at Big 12 and at SEC Media Days, so a lot to look forward to here in the next 5 or 6 weeks to kind of set things up. We'll continue to talk to coaches. We're scheduled to have a big coach who had a great offseason join us a little later in the week. He's from Texas Tech, Joey McGuire. So we're scheduled to have him. We look forward to our visit with Coach McGuire. And then we'll have more and more of these lists, and we'll have more and more interviews with some of your favorite coaches in the country coming up here in the next couple weeks. So for all of us here at Always College Football, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.